news tonight, the Prime Minister vows the upcoming parliamentary election will be fair and free of any state interference and says the outcome will reinstate the integrity of the process. In the latest wave of violence in Syria, at least 80 people are killed in 2 explosions at Aleppo University as students were sitting for exams. And Palestinian and international activists reoccupy the village of Bab al-Shams, an encampment set up to protest illegal Israeli settlement building on Palestinian land. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. His Majesty the King will attend the 3rd Arab Economic and Social Development Summit to open in the Saudi capital Riyadh next week. The 2-day summit is expected to draw up a blueprint for economic development in the region. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour has again vowed the upcoming parliamentary elections will be fair and free of any interference by the state. At a meeting with chief editors and columnists of local dailies, Mansour said the government's role is only to facilitate the work of the Independent Elections Commission, which is the body in charge of managing and supervising the entire process. He said the next election will reinstate the integrity of the process, previously under doubt and question. He said the next parliament will have to review the election law, put it up for discussion so as to come up with more favorable provisions, and here he said the media would have a big role to play. From the outset, Mansour pointed out, both Parliament and government must enforce the constitutional provision of separation of powers and put an end to each side meddling in the business of the other. The meeting also touched on the government's plans to review privatized institutions since 1989 and measures to create thousands of new work opportunities across the kingdom. 2 candidates running for parliamentary elections have been detained in 2 different constituencies for suspicion of vote buying. The Attorney General of South Amman ordered a candidate running for Amman's 2nd constituency to be held at Juwaide prison for 15 days for investigation. Security sources say they found checks and receipts to the value of 5,000 JDs offered by the candidate to voters in his constituency. Another candidate, a woman running for Qasabat al-Mafraq, was also being held at Juwaide prison for 15 days pending investigation, also for suspicion of vote buying or what has been dubbed as political money. And over to the violence in Syria, at least 80 people were killed and dozens wounded in 2 explosions that rocked a university in Aleppo as students were sitting for exams. The government and opposition activists blamed one another for the explosions. State television described the explosion at the university, which left 1 building damaged, as a terrorist attack. Fighting between rebels and government forces has reached a stalemate in Aleppo and left the city divided. Rebels say they now control more than half the province. Meanwhile, Russia is opposing a request submitted to the Security Council to refer the Syrian crisis to the International Criminal Court, saying it is ill-timed and counterproductive. The letter sent yesterday to the Security Council and signed by 50 countries states that the move would send a clear signal to the Syrian authorities. But a Russian Foreign Ministry statement today said the referral would not help end the civil war and would be counterproductive to resolving the main task, which is an immediate end to the bloodshed. Both the Syrian government and rebels have been accused of committing atrocities in the 21-month-old conflict, but the United Nations says the government and its allies are more culpable. And in Egypt, at least 19 people were killed and more than 100 injured when a military train derailed in a Cairo suburb. The train was carrying young recruits to army camp. The train driver was detained for 4 days pending investigations. Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi described the accident as a disaster for all Egyptians and vowed to punish those responsible. Egypt's roads and railways have a poor safety record, and Egyptians have long complained that successive governments have failed to enforce even basic safeguards, leading to a string of deadly crashes. In November last year, some 50 people, mostly children, were killed when a train slammed into a school bus as it crossed the tracks.
This is the third accident since the new regime took over, but nothing new. Can you imagine that media crews arrived to the place of the accident before any paramedic efforts or even any official person to cast an eye on? Where is the new regime? There is no country.
In the West Bank, Israeli occupation forces using stun grenades blocked Palestinian and international activists from demonstrating on Palestinian land Israel has earmarked for Jewish settlement. Some 50 Palestinians and international activists were trying to reoccupy tents they pitched a week ago on a patch of land overlooking Jerusalem, on which Israel plans to erect new settlement buildings. One activist wore a white bridal gown, while cars were decked out in bright ribbons, making the protest look like a traditional Palestinian wedding. Yesterday, Israeli police evicted the protesters from the area, but today, as they tried to return to their tents, they were confronted by police officers saying the site is designated off-limits. The steel tents the Palestinians erected last week to set a village named Bab al-Shams remain pitched, but so far about 20 of the Palestinian protesters have been detained for questioning. Her Majesty Queen Rania delivered a keynote address at the opening of the Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, where she highlighted the importance of long-term sustainable energy solutions for global development. Her Majesty was joined by the French and Argentinian presidents as main speakers at the event, while in attendance was UAE Prime Minister and Vice President Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. The annual meeting drew government and civil society leaders, as well as experts in the fields of energy, environment, food and water from 150 countries. Queen Rania expressed pride that many innovative solutions to energy challenges are coming from the Arab world. Citing Bedouin women in Jordan as an example, she said a number of those women are training to become solar engineers and are swapping unhealthy kerosene lamps with solar power lamps. Queen Rania said 1.4 billion people in the world, or 1 in 5 individuals globally, still cannot access grid electricity, while for 1 billion more, access is not reliable. But she added the most crippling effects of energy poverty are felt by children.
It is a cruel irony that those who had the least to do with climate change and energy crisis are paying the highest price, and they know it. With capital investment and political will, we could light up schools for children, power health clinics for mothers and their babies, and pump clean water for families. With new energy, we could fuel a solar revolution, bring about a boom in the science, engineering, and manufacturing fields, build green industries and green jobs, and open new markets for aspiring entrepreneurs.
The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, begins a visit to Iran tomorrow aimed at unblocking an investigation into Tehran's suspected atom bomb research. Deputy Director General of IAEA said in Vienna the agency will seek to finalize a framework deal with Iran on how its inquiry should be done. Iran denies allegation there has been any explosive tests in the Parchan military facility southeast of Tehran and insists a deal must be reached before giving the IAEA any access to the area. A report by U.S. non-proliferation experts issued this week states that Iran could produce enough weapon-grade uranium for 1 or more nuclear bombs by next year and recommends intensified sanctions on Tehran by Washington and its allies. Over to the situation in Mali. The United States is considering providing logistical support to assist France in fighting rebel forces in the country. A White House source said Washington shares the French goal of denying terrorists a safe haven in the region and therefore would support the French operation. Meanwhile, West African leaders are meeting in the Malian capital Bamako to discuss troop deployment at the request of the government to interfere. Here's more.
West African military chiefs met in Bamako on Tuesday to discuss plans to speed up the deployment of 3,300 regional troops in an effort to push Islamist rebels out of northern Mali. Leaders from the economic community of West African states gathered to decide on a deployment schedule, with some West African troops set to be on the ground in a week's time. Senegal, Burkina Faso, Niger, Nigeria, and Guinea have all offered troops. The original timetable for the UN-sanctioned African force did not initially foresee full deployment before September due to logistical constraints. But the plan has been fast-tracked after a plea for help by Mali's government, after mobile columns of Islamist fighters began threatening key settlements. France has already poured hundreds of troops into Mali and has kept up airstrikes on Islamist militant targets. Their mission has been aided by deliveries of military equipment by British RAF C-17 cargo planes.
Car lovers can head to Detroit for the International Auto Show that is focusing this year on luxury cars. And nothing says luxury quite like a Bentley, a dream on wheels. The Continental GT Speed convertible, which is making its debut at the show, has it all. With sleek style and a 616 horsepower 12-cylinder engine that pushes the convertible to over 320 kilometers per hour. At the BMW stand, all eyes are on the new 4 Series Coupe. And with the economic recovery underway, U.S. automakers are also upping their luxury game. A new Corvette Stingray had everyone buzzing, while Lincoln put a foot forward with its new MKC, its first ever small utility vehicle. But it remains to be unknown just how well luxury car consumers will respond to the display. We begin with tennis and the Australian Open in Melbourne. World #1 Victoria Azarenka got her Australian Open title defense underway with an unconvincing victory over Romania's Monica Niculescu. The Belarusian did well to battle back to secure victory without going to a third set after going 3-love down in the second. Azarenka, however, won 6-1, 6-4. Serena Williams recovered from a nasty fall and painful ankle injury to blast her way into the second round with a 2-set victory over Romania's Adina Galvots-Hall. The world #3, obviously in pain, cruised to a smooth 6-love, 6-love win. Japan's Kimiko Date-Krum produced the biggest shock of the Australian Open so far when she unseated 12th seed Nadia Petrova to become the oldest winner of a women's singles match at the tournament. The 42-year-old was well worth the quick-fire victory, which she sealed on her second match point when her Russian opponent hit a forehand wide. She won 6-2, 6-love. And in the men's singles, Andy Murray launched his bid for a second successive Grand Slam trophy with a crushing 3-set win over Dutchman Robin Haas. Murray won 6-3, 6-1, 6-3.
Game Murray. Murray leads 3-1.
The worldwide.
Lance Armstrong has finally confronted his alleged using of performance-enhancing drugs during his cycling career, which led to the withdrawal of all his titles. Although he never tested positive in a doping test, evidence against him has been overwhelming and pressure has been building on him to admit that he cheated. Although he confessed to the doping in with Oprah Winfrey. When Oprah herself was interviewed, she did not explicitly say that Armstrong had confessed, saying it was the media that confirmed it. A cancer survivor who went on to become the greatest cyclist the world has seen, Armstrong's fall from grace has been as swift and spectacular as his rise through the French Alps.
Prepared like it was a college exam, and walked into the room with 112 questions. And in a 2.5-hour interview, I asked most of those questions, or at least as many of those questions as I could, but I feel that he answered the questions in a way that he was ready. I didn't get all the questions asked, but I think the most important questions and the answers that people around the world have been waiting to hear were answered, and certainly answered. I can only say I was satisfied by the answer.
And finally, to the weather outlook. It continues to be cold tonight with southeasterly moderate to brisk winds. Similar weather conditions prevail tomorrow in most regions, but it'll be fair in the Jordan Valley with the appearance of medium and high clouds. Winds will be southeasterly moderate to brisk, blowing dust in the desert areas. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect fair and partly cloudy weather tomorrow with northerly moderate winds and calm seas. The weatherman warns of frost formation after midnight and in the early morning hours in most regions, and of freeze in hilly areas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tomorrow night and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. The Prime Minister vows the upcoming parliamentary election will be fair and free of any state interference, and says the outcome will reinstate the integrity of the process. In the latest wave of violence in Syria, at least 80 people are killed in 2 explosions at Aleppo University as students were sitting for exams. And Palestinian and international activists reoccupy the village of Bab al-Shams, an encampment set up to protest illegal Israeli settlement building on Palestinian land. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.